The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting an orange glow over manicured lawns of Willow Creek Estates, a gated community where every mailbox was identical and every blade of grass seemed to live in fear of growing too tall. I'd moved here 6 months ago, seeking a quiet retirement after 30 years in the Secret Service. My name's Jack Callahan, and I'd seen enough action to last 3 lifetimes, guarding presidents, neutralizing threats, and once tackling a would-be assassin mid-lunge during a campaign rally in Ohio. But Willow Creek? This was supposed to be my sanctuary, a place to polish my antique shotguns, sip bourbon, and maybe, just maybe, avoid trouble. Trouble, though, has a way of finding me, like a bloodhound with a grudge. It came in the form of Karen Pritchard, the HOA president, whose life's mission seemed to be ensuring nobody in Willow Creek had any fun. Karen was the kind of woman who'd measure your fence with a ruler and send you a violation notice if it was half an inch too tall. Her emails, always signed Karen Pritchard, HOA President, Willow Creek Estates, were infamous for their passive-aggressive tone and bullet-pointed list of infractions. I'd already gotten one for leaving my garage door open 10 minutes too long while cleaning my truck. But this story isn't about fences or garage doors. It's about my shotguns, my pride and joy, a collection of meticulously restored pieces, from a 1912 Winchester Model 12 to a sleek Beretta I'd picked up during an overseas assignment. I kept them locked in a custom-built safe in my basement, a room I'd turned into a small armory/man cave. The safe was biometric, bolted to the foundation, and could probably withstand a nuclear blast. I wasn't some reckless gun nut. I was a man who respected the craft, the history, and the responsibility of firearms. Karen, though, didn't see it that way. It all started on a Tuesday afternoon when I was in the garage, cleaning a 1960s Remington 870. The garage door was up, yes, I know, a Cardinal sin in Willow Creek, and I was wiping down the barrel with a cloth, the radio playing some classic rock. I heard her before I saw her, the unmistakable click-clack of Karen's heels on the pavement, like a metronome set to judgmental. "Mr. Callahan," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She stood at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, her blonde bob so perfect it looked like it was glued on. "Are you aware that firearms are not permitted to be displayed in public view per HOA Regulation 7.2.3? I set the shotgun down on my workbench and turned to face her, wiping my hands on a rag. "Karen, I'm in my garage on my property. This isn't a public display. It's a private cleaning session." Her eyes narrowed, zeroing in on the Remington like it was a live grenade. "That's a firearm, Mr. Callahan. The HOA has strict rules about weapons, and I'm not sure the board would approve of whatever it is you're doing." "I'm cleaning a legally owned, unloaded shotgun," I said, keeping my tone even. 30 years of de-escalating tense situations had taught me to stay calm, even when dealing with someone like Karen. "I'm not breaking any laws or HOA rules. If you'd like, I can show you the safe where I store them." Her lips pursed, and I could practically see the gears turning in her head, searching for a violation to pin on me. "I'll be discussing this with the board," she said finally, before spinning on her heel and marching off, her clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon of mass bureaucracy. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I was in my basement, cataloging a new acquisition, a 1940s Ithaca 37 with a walnut stock that gleamed like it had just rolled off the assembly line, when my doorbell rang. Not the polite single chime of a neighbor dropping by with cookies, but the insistent rapid-fire buzz of someone who meant business. I glanced at my security camera feed and saw 2 police officers standing on my porch, hands resting casually on their belts. Behind them, lurking near the curb, was Karen, her arms crossed and a smug smile plastered on her face. I opened the door, keeping my posture relaxed but alert. "Evening, officers. What can I do for you?" The older cop, a guy with a gray mustache and a name tag reading Sergeant Malone, spoke first. "Mr. Callahan, we got a report of a large firearms collection being stored unsafely at this address. Mind if we have a word?" I glanced past him at Karen, who was pretending to inspect her nails, but clearly eavesdropping. "Let me guess," I said. "The HOA president filed a complaint?" Malone's partner, a younger officer named Rodriguez, shifted uncomfortably. We're just following up. Sir, can we come in? I stepped aside, gesturing them in. Sure thing. But I'll warn you now, you're not going to find anything illegal. Coffee. They declined the coffee, but followed me inside. Karen tried to trail them, but I stopped her at the door. This is a police matter, Karen. Unless you've got a badge, you're staying out here. Her face turned the color of a ripe tomato, but she didn't argue. I closed the door and led the officers to basement. On the way, I grabbed my old Secret Service badge from a drawer, not to flash it, but just in case. Old habits die hard. Downstairs, I opened the safe, revealing the shotguns neatly arranged on custom racks, each one unloaded, with trigger locks in place. I walked the officers through the setup, the biometric lock, the fireproofing, the ammo stored separately in a locked cabinet. Malone whistled low. This is impressive. You a collector? Something like that, I said. Retired Secret Service. 30 years. These are my hobby now. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. Secret Service? Like protecting the president? Among other things, I said, handing over my badge to them to inspect. Malone took it, turned it over in his hands, and nodded. Well, Mr. Callahan, he said, handing the badge back, everything here looks by the book. Sorry to bother you. We'll let the complainant know there's no issue. I walked him out, and sure enough, Karen was still there, hovering like a vulture. Malone tipped his hat to her. Ma'am, there's no violation here. The firearms are stored securely, and Mr. Callahan is well within his rights. Karen's jaw dropped, but she recovered quickly. This isn't over, she snapped, pointing a manicured finger at me. The HOA will be reviewing this at the next meeting. As the officers drove off, I leaned against the doorframe, watching Karen storm back to her house across the street. I should have known she wouldn't let it go. Karen wasn't just a busybody. She was a one-woman crusade, and I had just painted a target on my back. The next week, the HOA meeting was held in the community center, a sterile room with fluorescent lights and folding chairs. I didn't usually attend these things. Too much bickering over paint colors and mailbox uniformity. But this time, I got a formal summons in my inbox, demanding my presence to discuss concerns regarding dangerous activities. I showed up, dressed in a blazer and jeans, my old Secret Service calm settling over me like a second skin. Karen was in her element, standing at the front of the room, wielding a laser pointer like a scepter. The other board members, 3 retirees and a guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, sat behind a table, looking bored. The room was half full, mostly nosy neighbors curious about the drama. Mr. Callahan, Karen began, her voice dripping with authority. We received reports that you're maintaining an arsenal of dangerous weapons in your home, in direct violation of HOA safety guidelines. Care to explain yourself? I stood, hands in my pockets, and addressed the room. I'm a retired Secret Service agent with a legally owned collection of antique shotguns. They're stored in a biometric safe, unloaded, with trigger locks. The police inspected my setup and found no issues. I'm not sure what the problem is here. A murmur went through the crowd. Karen's face tightened. The problem, she said, is that this community is a safe space and your obsession with guns threatens that. We're proposing a new rule, no firearm collections exceeding 3 weapons. The room erupted in whispers. I caught the eye of Mr. Thompson, a Vietnam vet who lived 2 doors down. He gave me a nod, like he was ready to back me up. But before I could respond, Karen continued. Furthermore, we've consulted with legal counsel, and we believe your activities could be grounds for fines or even eviction. That's when I knew this wasn't just about shotguns. Karen had taken it personally, and she was gunning for me, pun intended. I leaned forward, my voice steady but firm. Karen, with all due respect, you don't have the authority to override state or federal law. My collection is legal, secure, and none of your business. If you want to push this, I've got my own legal counsel who'd love to have a chat. The room went silent. Karen blinked, caught off guard, but she wasn't done. This isn't about laws, Mr. Callahan. It's about community standards. And frankly, your attitude isn't helping. Before I could fire back, Mr. Thompson stood up, his voice gravelly but commanding. I've known Jack for 6 months, and I trust him with my life. He's not the problem here. Maybe we should be talking about why the HOA is wasting time on this instead of fixing the potholes in the parking lot. A few neighbors clapped. Karen's laser pointer wavered. The meeting spiraled from there, with more residents chiming in, some on my side, some on Karen's, and a few just there for the popcorn-worthy drama. By the end, no new rule was passed, but Karen made it clear she wasn't backing down. As I left the community center, I caught her whispering to another board member, her eyes locked on me. Back home, I poured a glass of bourbon and sat in my basement, staring at my shotguns. This wasn't over. Karen was plotting her next move, and I'd learned long ago that people like her don't stop until they're forced to. I'd spent my career dealing with threats, some with guns, some with words. Karen was the latter, but no less dangerous in her own way. I took a sip, the bourbon warm on my tongue, and started thinking about my next move. Maybe it was time to dig into the HOA bylaws, find a few loopholes of my own. Or maybe it was time to remind Karen that I wasn't just some retiree with a hobby. I was a man who'd stared down worse than her and come out on top. The night was quiet, but I knew a storm was brewing in Willow Creek, and I'd be ready for it. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing like an angry hornet. It was a text from Mr. Thompson, the Vietnam vet who'd backed me up at the HOA meeting. Check your mailbox. Karen's at it again. I pulled on a flannel shirt, grabbed my coffee mug, and stepped outside into the crisp Willow Creek air. Sure enough, taped to my mailbox was a neon yellow notice, the kind that screams official but feels like a personal vendetta. It was from the HOA, citing ongoing concerns about community safety and demanding an inspection of my property by the end of the week. Karen's signature was scrawled at the bottom, her loopy handwriting practically radiating smugness. I crumpled the notice and headed back inside, my mind already working through the angles. Karen wasn't just pushing buttons. She was trying to build a case, probably hoping to scare me into compliance or force me out entirely. But I'd spent my career outmaneuvering people far more dangerous than a clipboard-wielding HOA president. If she wanted to fight, I'd give her one, but on my terms. First, I needed intel. I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, and started digging into the HOA bylaws, which were conveniently posted on the Willow Creek website. Though I bet Karen didn't expect anyone to actually read them. The document was a 47-page masterpiece of bureaucratic nonsense, filled with rules about everything from approved paint colors to maximum height of decorative yard gnomes. I searched for anything about firearms or property inspections. Sure enough, there was a vague clause about items deemed hazardous to the community, but it was so poorly worded it could mean anything from a propane grill to a pet python. The inspection rule, though, was trickier. It allowed the HOA to request access to a homeowner's property with reasonable cause, but only with majority board vote and 48 hours notice. I leaned back, sipping my coffee. Karen's notice didn't mention a board vote, which meant she was either bluffing or bypassing protocol. Either way, it was a weak move, and I wasn't about to let her waltz into my home to snoop around. But I also knew I couldn't just ignore her. She'd take that as a win and double down. I needed to play this smart, keep the upper hand, and maybe even turn the tables. That afternoon, I drove to the local library, a quiet brick building just outside Willow Creek. I wasn't there for books, though. I wanted to use their public computers to do some research without leaving a digital footprint on my home network. Old Secret Service habits. Never make it easy for someone to track you. I started with Karen herself. A quick search on public records and social media painted a picture. Karen Pritchard, 48, divorced, no kids, owned a real estate business that specialized in flipping condos. Her ex-profile was a goldmine of self-righteous posts about community standards and protecting property values, mixed with photos of her sipping wine at charity galas. But there was something else. A few old news articles about a failed lawsuit she filed against a previous HOA for mismanagement. Seems Karen had a history of power trips. Then I dug into the HOA board. The three retirees, Mrs. Delaney, Mr. Horowitz, and Mrs. Chun, seemed like typical busybodies, but the fourth member, the bored-looking guy from the meeting, caught my attention. His name was Ethan Walsh, a 30-something tech consultant who'd moved to Willow Creek a year ago. Unlike the others, he wasn't retired, and his social media showed he spent more time hiking and brewing craft beer than kissing up to Karen. If I could get Ethan on my side, I might have an ally on the board. Back home, I decided to pay Ethan a visit. His house was a few streets over, a modest two-story with a mountain bike leaning against a garage. I knocked, and he answered wearing a faded t-shirt and a curious expression. "Jack, right? From the HOA meeting?" he said, stepping onto the porch. "Yeah," I said, keeping it casual. "I figured we should talk neighbor to neighbor. Mind if I ask you something about the board?" Ethan glanced around, like he was checking for Karen spies, then nodded. "Sure, but let's make this quick. I've got a Zoom call in 10. I got straight to the point. Karen's pushing for an inspection of my place over my shotgun collection. You know anything about a board vote?" Ethan frowned, running a hand through his messy hair. "No vote. She mentioned something about safety concerns in an email, but I thought it was just her usual noise. She didn't bring it to the board." "Figures," I said. "She's trying to strong-arm me. You think the others would go along with her?" He shrugged. "Delaney and Horowitz worship the ground she walks on, but Mrs. Chen's more reasonable. Problem is, Karen's got them all spooked about liability. She keeps saying your guns could tank our property values if word gets out." I nodded, filing that away. "And you? What's your take?" Ethan smirked. "I think Karen needs a hobby that doesn't involve harassing people. Look, I don't care about your guns as long as they're legal, but she's got the board wrapped around her finger, and she's good at twisting things. You're going to need more than just the law on your side." "Thanks for the heads up," I said, shaking his hand. "Mind keeping this between us?" "No problem," he said. "And watch your back. Karen's not above playing dirty." That night, I sat in my basement, the glow of my laptop screen reflecting off the polished barrels of my shotguns. Ethan's warning stuck with me. Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was a strategist, and I needed to think like one, too. I started drafting a plan. First, I'd send a formal response to her notice, citing the bylaws and demanding proof of a board vote. That'd buy me time and put her on the defensive. Second, I'd rally some neighbors. Mr. Thompson was already on my side, and I knew a few others, like the Wilsons, who'd gotten their own HOA grief over a backyard trampoline. Who might join me if I framed this as Karen overstepping her power? But the real wild card was the community itself. Willow Creek was full of people who just wanted to live their lives, not deal with HOA drama. If I could show them Karen's crusade was less about safety and more about control, I might turn the tide. I started typing an open letter to the residents, keeping it polite but firm, laying out the facts, my background, the legality of my collection, the police's approval. I'd print it out and slip it into mailboxes tomorrow night, under the cover of darkness. Karen wasn't the only one who could play sneaky. As I hit save on the draft, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Mr. Thompson. "Heard Karen's been asking around about you. Says she's got a source who knows something about your past. Be careful." My jaw tightened. My Secret Service career wasn't exactly a secret, but there were parts of it, classified ops, close calls in places I couldn't name, that I'd buried deep. If Karen was digging, she might find more than she bargained for, or she might twist nothing into something and spread it around Willow Creek like wildfire. Either way, this was escalating, and I needed to stay one step ahead. I poured another glass of bourbon, the amber liquid catching the light from my desk lamp. Outside, the neighborhood was silent, but I could feel the tension building, like the calm before a storm. Karen thought she was in charge, but she didn't know who she was dealing with. I'd faced down cartels, rogue agents, and worse. A suburban HOA president? She was just another mission, and I wasn't about to lose. The next evening, under a moonless sky, I slipped through Willow Creek like a ghost, dropping my open letter into every mailbox on the block. Each envelope was plain, no return address, just a single sheet inside laying out the truth. My name, my Secret Service background, the secure storage of my shotgun collection, and the police's confirmation that I'd done nothing wrong. I ended the letter with a question. Do we want an HOA that respects our rights, or one that overreaches into our homes? Simple, direct, and hopefully enough to stir the pot without starting a war. By the time I slid the last letter into Mr. Thompson's mailbox, my watch read 1:03 a.m. I headed home, the quiet of the night broken only by the distant bark of a dog. The next morning, Willow Creek was buzzing. I could tell from the way neighbors lingered on their porches, whispering over coffee mugs, or shot curious glances at my house as they walked their dogs. My letter had done its job. People were talking, but Karen wasn't one to let a challenge go unanswered. Around noon, my inbox pinged with a new email from Karen Pritchard, HOA President, Willow Creek Estates. The subject line, addressing misinformation and community safety concerns. I opened it, expecting a tirade, but Karen was smarter than that. The email was polished, almost corporate, with phrases like commitment to transparency and prioritizing the well-being of our residents. She didn't name me directly, but referenced recent concerns about hazardous items in a resident home and announced an emergency HOA meeting in 3 days to discuss updated safety protocols. Attached was a proposed amendment to bylaws, limiting firearms collections to 3 items and requiring HOA approval for any specialized storage. It was a direct shot at me, dressed up as community concern. I leaned back in my kitchen chair, the email glowing on my laptop screen. Karen was playing chess, and this was her knight's gambit, flanking me with bureaucracy while keeping her hands clean. But she'd made a mistake. The emergency meeting required a quorum of residents, and her email had gone to every homeowner in Willow Creek. She'd just given me a stage. I spent the afternoon strategizing. First, I called Mr. Thompson, who was already rallying a few neighbors to attend a meeting and speak against the amendment. Karen's got half the board eating out of her hand, he grumbled over the phone. But folks like the Wilsons and Mrs. Rodriguez are fed up with her nonsense. You got support, Jack. Next, I reached out to Ethan Walsh, the tech consultant on the board. He agreed to meet me for coffee at a diner just outside the neighborhood, away from prying eyes. At the diner, Ethan slid into the booth across from me, his laptop bag slung over his shoulder. "You're stirring up a hornet's nest," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Karen's been calling board members nonstop, pushing this amendment like it's her life's mission. She's overplaying her hand." I said, keeping my voice low, "The bylaws don't give her the power to inspect my home without a board vote, and her emergency meeting is a stretch. What's the mood on the board?" Ethan sighed, Mrs. Chen skeptical, but won't rock the boat. Delaney and Horowitz are all in for Karen. They think she's saving the neighborhood from turning into a war zone. But I'm with you, Jack. This feels personal, and I don't like being strong-armed. Problem is, Karen's got a knack for spinning things. She's already telling people you're intimidating residents with your military background. I snorted. 30 years in the Secret Service, and I'm intimidating because I clean my shotguns in my own garage? She's reaching. "Yeah, but she's good at it," Ethan said. "She's been digging into you. Asked me if I knew anything about your career, like she's fishing for dirt. You got any skeletons she might find?" I took a sip of my coffee, letting the question hang. My career wasn't secret, but it wasn't an open book either. There were ops, classified, off-the-record missions in places like Bogota and Sanaa that nobody in Willow Creek would ever hear about. Not because I was hiding anything, but because that's how the job worked. If Karen was sniffing around, she'd likely hit dead ends, but she could still twist nothing into something. "She won't find anything that holds up," I said finally, "but I need to know if you'll back me at the meeting." Ethan nodded. "I'll vote against the amendment, and I'll talk to Mrs. Chun, see if I can sway her. But you better show up with a plan, Jack. Karen's got the room rigged in her favor." "Appreciate it," I said, sliding a 10 across the table to cover his coffee. "And if you hear anything else about her source, let me know." Back home, I started preparing for the meeting like it was a mission briefing. I printed out copies of the police report from the officer's visit, highlighting their conclusion that my collection was secure and legal. I also pulled up the state's firearms laws, just in case Karen tried to bluff her way through legalities. But the real weapon was the community itself. I spent the next 2 days knocking on doors, talking to neighbors I'd barely met. Most were hesitant at first. Nobody wanted to cross Karen. But when I explained how her amendment could set a precedent for the HOA meddling in their private lives, They started listening. The Wilsons, still bitter about their trampoline fine, were all in. Mrs. Rodriguez, a retired nurse, agreed to speak up after I pointed out that Karen's safety concerns could just as easily target her grandson's paintball gear. By the time the meeting rolled around, I had a loose coalition of a dozen residents ready to push back. The community center was packed that evening, the air thick with tension and the faint smell of cheap coffee. Karen stood at the front, her laser pointer at the ready, while the board sat behind her like a panel of judges. I took a seat near the front, Mr. Thompson on one side, Mrs. Wilson on the other. Ethan caught my eye from the board table and gave a subtle nod. Karen opened with her usual flair, projecting a PowerPoint slide titled, "Ensuring a Safe Willow Creek." She droned on about property values and community harmony, then zeroed in on the amendment. "We had reports of a resident maintaining an excessive number of firearms," she said, her eyes flicking to me. "This amendment ensures that such collections are regulated for everyone's safety." The room murmured. I stood, raising a hand. "Mind if I respond, Karen?" Her smile tightened, but she couldn't say no without looking like a dictator. "Of course, Mr. Callahan." I faced the crowd, keeping my tone calm but firm, like I was briefing a room of agents. "I'm Jack Callahan, retired Secret Service. I own a collection of antique shotguns, all legally purchased, unloaded, and stored in a biometric safe that meets federal standards." The police inspected my setup and found no issues. Karen's amendment isn't about safety, it's about control. If she can dictate what I keep in my home, what's next? Your tools? Your hobbies? Your privacy? A few heads nodded. Mrs. Wilson stood up next. "Jack's right. Last year, the HOA fined us for our kid's trampoline, claiming it was a liability. Now they're after his property. Where does it end?" Karen's face reddened, but she kept her composure. "This isn't about trampolines, Mrs. Wilson. It's about dangerous weapons in a family-friendly community." Before I could counter, a new voice cut through the room. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, standing at the back, her voice steady. "Karen, you keep talking about safety, but you haven't shown us any evidence that Jack's collection is a threat. I've lived here 20 years, and I feel safer knowing a man like him is my neighbor, not someone who'd snoop in my house." The crowd erupted in applause, louder than I'd expected. Karen's laser pointer froze midair. For the first time, she looked rattled. Ethan seized the moment, leaning forward from the board table. "I move we table this amendment until we can review it properly. All in favor?" Mrs. Chin raised her hand, followed by Ethan. Delaney and Horowitz hesitated, but the room's energy was shifting. Karen's amendment was on shaky ground, and she knew it. As the meeting adjourned, I caught Karen glaring at me from front of the room, her clipboard clutched like a shield. She wasn't done, not by a long shot. Later that night, as I locked at my house, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think you've won, but I know more than you think. Watch yourself." I stared at the screen, my old instincts kicking in. Karen had just upped the ante, and now it wasn't just about shotguns. It was personal. I needed to find out who her source was and what she thought she had on me. The game was far from over, and in Willow Creek, the stakes were only getting higher. The anonymous text sat like a live wire in my hand, its words. "You think you've won, but I know more than you think. Watch yourself," burning into my brain. I stood in my kitchen, the hum of fridge the only sound in the house, and felt that old Secret Service instinct kick in. Assess, analyze, act. Karen Pritchard wasn't just playing HOA dictator anymore. She was digging into my past, or at least thought she was. I didn't know what her source had fed her, but I wasn't about to let her blindside me. In my line of work, surprises got people hurt. In Willow Creek, they just got messy. First things first, I needed to know who sent that text. I forwarded it to a buddy from my Secret Service days, a tech wizard named Marcus who now ran a cybersecurity firm. He owed me a favor from a dicey situation in Dubai a decade back, and I trusted him to keep things quiet. Traced this number. I texted him. No questions, just results. His reply came fast. "Give me 24 hours. While Marcus worked his magic, I doubled down on my own investigation. Karen's email about the emergency HOA meeting had mentioned a source feeding her information, and Mr. Thompson's warning echoed the same. Whoever this source was, they were either someone in Willow Creek or an outsider Karen had roped in to dig up dirt. I started with the neighbors, making casual rounds the next morning under guise of borrowing tools or chatting about the weather. Most folks were still buzzing about the HOA meeting, and a few, like the Wilsons and Mrs. Rodriguez, offered quiet thanks for standing up to Karen. But no one seemed to know anything about a mysterious informant. Then I hit pay dirt. At the edge of the neighborhood, I stopped by the house of old Mr. Jenkins, a widower who spent most of his days tinkering with model trains in his garage. He wasn't at the meeting, but he had a reputation for noticing everything. Saw Karen talking to some guy in a black SUV last week, he said, squinting at me over his glasses. Not from around here. Looked like a private investigator type. Cheap suit, notepad, the works. They were parked by the community pool. Thought I didn't see him. Any idea what they were talking about? I asked, keeping my tone light. Nope, but she handed him an envelope. Looked thick. Cash, maybe. Jenkins shrugged. She's been poking around your place, Jack. Saw her taking pictures of your garage a couple days ago. I thanked him and headed home, my mind racing. A private investigator? Karen was escalating, but she was also getting sloppy. If she was paying someone to snoop, there'd be a paper trail, and I had ways to find it. I called Marcus again, adding a new request. Check Karen's financials for any unusual payments. It was a long shot, but if she was hiring a PI, she might have used her real estate business account, which wasn't as private as she thought. By the next evening, Marcus came through. The text came from a burner phone, untraceable for now, but he'd found something else. A $2,000 payment from Karen's business to a consulting firm called Apex Solutions, registered to a guy named Vincent Russo. A quick search on X showed Russo advertising discreet investigative services out of a strip mall in the next town over. Bingo! Karen's source had a name, and I had a lead. I decided to confront Russo myself. The next morning, I drove to his office, a cramped suite above a vape shop that smelled like burnt sugar. Russo was exactly what I expected. Mid-40s, slick back hair, and a handshake that felt like he was trying to sell me a used car. Mr. Callahan, he said, leaning back in his chair. What brings you here? Let's skip the small talk, Vincent, I said, tossing a printout of his Apex Solutions website on his desk. You're working for Karen Pritchard, digging into my life. I want to know what you told her. His smirk faltered, but he recovered fast. I don't discuss client business. Confidentiality, you know? I know a lot of things, I said, leaning forward. Like how a PI with a suspended license in 2 states might not want his current client list reported to the state board for ethics violations. Talk, or I make some calls. Russo's face went pale. All right, he said, raising his hands. Karen hired me to look into you. Wanted dirt. Anything to make you look bad at that HOA meeting. I checked public records, your Secret Service stuff, but it's all clean, so I may have exaggerated a bit. Told her you had questionable contacts from your career. Nothing specific, just enough to spook her. I stared him down. You fed her lies to keep her checks coming. It's business, he shrugged, but his eyes darted to the door. Look, I didn't give her anything solid. She's got nothing on you. I stood, leaving the printout on his desk. You're done working for her. And if I hear you're poking around Willow Creek again, you'll regret it. Back home, I had what I needed. Karen's source was a fraud, and her whole campaign was built on smoke and mirrors. The emergency HOA meeting was tomorrow, and I was ready to end this. I spent the evening preparing a packet for every resident. Copies of the police report, a summary of state firearms laws, and a screenshot of Russo's shady website with a note about Karen's unreliable source. I wasn't just defending my shotguns anymore. I was exposing her power grab. The meeting was standing room only, the community center buzzing with anticipation. Karen took the podium. Her usual confidence dialed up to 11. Tonight, we vote on an amendment to protect our community from dangerous items, she said, her eyes locking on me. We've uncovered concerning information about a resident's background, and it's time to act. I stood, packet in hand, and raised my voice. Before we vote, I'd like to share some facts. I handed out the packets. watching Karen's face tighten as residents flipped through them. The police clear my collection, the law's on my side, and Karen's so-called source? A disgraced PI she paid to lie about me. Here's the proof. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Ethan Walsh, from the board table, held up his packet. I've read this, and I'm moving to dismiss this amendment entirely. Karen, you owe us an explanation. Mrs. Chin nodded, her usual neutrality replaced with a frown. I second the motion. This feels like a personal vendetta, not a safety issue. Karen stammered, her laser pointer shaking. This is outrageous. I'm trying to protect this community. But the crowd wasn't buying it. Mr. Thompson stood, his voice booming. You've been bullying us for years, Karen. Jack's just the latest target. Maybe it's time we vote on a new HOA president. The applause was deafening. Karen's face went from red to white, her clipboard slipping to the floor. The vote to dismiss the amendment passed overwhelmingly, and a petition to recall Karen as president started circulating before the meeting even ended. As I walked out into the cool night air, Mr. Thompson clapped me on the shoulder. You did good, Jack, but she's not going to take this lying down. He was right. The next morning, I found a new note taped to my mailbox, handwritten this time. This isn't over. No signature, but I knew Karen's loopy scrawl. I smiled, tucking the note into my pocket. Let her try. I'd faced worse than an HOA tyrant, and I was just getting started in Willow Creek.